Hey there. Now we're going to talk about actual discrimination. From now on, all of these elements of claims are required. This isn't a test. A claim has actual elements that you have to meet every single one, including in cases like we're talking about today, the discrimination cases. Discrimination has a long history in the United States, and there are lots of laws against it, all sorts of laws, depending on all the sorts of things that the discrimination is based upon. The thing that strikes the government and the courts the most is that you say, you are a for-profit business. Your goal is to make money. Whether you make a better product so you sell more, so you make more money, whether your service is superior, so you provide more of that service because more people want it and you make more money, but the goal is to be a successful company. That's the way the law works in the United States. And there's a lot of things about people that they're born with that shouldn't matter, especially if they're good at their job. Someone can't help if they were born with a certain skin color or another. Or, I suppose they can believe in a religion or not, but that's also protected. That's not up to you as an employer. They can believe whatever they want. And as long as they're good at the job, then that's not a reason to not hire them, to fire them, whatever happens. So the goal of the company is to make better things, to give better service. The only thing that should matter at that point is that they give better service or make better things. It would be too much if we just said everything in the whole wide world matters. So we do have a list in the Civil Rights Act of things that are protected. The Civil Rights Act itself, we're talking about race, color, national origin, religion, sex, all of those sorts of things. States can add on top of that. Some states say your tobacco use is protected. Michigan doesn't say that. Some states say your alcohol use is protected. Most states don't. But states can add rights, remember, and some states do. Michigan added height, weight, and marital status. That is protected in Michigan. It's not protected anywhere, and it's certainly not protected federally. So states can add those rights because I suppose when it was passed, it was a problem in Michigan about marital status being an issue for people at work. So that's protected, and you're not allowed to discriminate based on marital status. There are two kinds of ways someone can file a claim based on discrimination. There is a disparate treatment and an adverse impact. Disparate treatment is for much more open claims, or if someone is openly racist or openly sexist or those sorts of things. Adverse impact is a little bit harder to detect. But before we get to those, I also want to kind of go back and combine these, those statutes like the Civil Rights Act will combine with the court's interpretation of them. And this is kind of when we get into the case about the mixture of statutory law and common law and how they intertwine. So since the 1960s, both the federal government and the state of Michigan have said sex is a protected trait, it's a protected quality. It shouldn't matter if you're a man or a woman for the job you get. Okay. Then all of a sudden, years later, late 70s, early 80s, women started getting fired for being pregnant. And the company would always have an excuse about they can't perform the job when they're pregnant. This is a physical job. We want the woman to stay at home and take it easy and do all those sorts of things. And there were a lot of women that were like, nope, I want to keep working, and you can't discriminate against me because I'm pregnant. Actually, the company said, companies, it was happening all over the place, no, that's not a protected class. I can fire you for any reason I want, at will employment, good reason, bad reason, no reason at all. I fired you for that reason. Whether you think it's bad or not, I'm still allowed to fire you for it because it's not pointed out in all of these classes that the civil rights movement gave people. So what ended up happening is the court, through many lawsuits, eventually protected pregnancy through sex. Sex is protected. You can't discriminate against it. Who can get pregnant? Women. Can men get pregnant? No. So then what's the difference? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with sex. Yeah, we just said women can get pregnant, men can't. Inherently, a man is never going to be able to be fired from his job for being pregnant. So they said that that was sex discrimination. Because the only difference between people who can get pregnant and who can't are people who were born women or men. And that's it. No one was talking about their ability to do the job. No one was talking about anything. It's just the fact that a different sex can get pregnant or not. The other, so that was that. And then it went further about, okay, a woman wanted to breastfeed at work. And there were some cases where, the woman was fired for breastfeeding or not given a reason, but it happened to be the timing was really suspicious. About right after she asked about, can I breastfeed or is there somewhere where I can go where I can breastfeed? The employer was like, you know what, you're just not a really good fit anymore. And they were fired. And it was the same thing. The court looked at it, it was almost the exact same analysis. Is who can breastfeed? Can men breastfeed? No. Can women breastfeed? Yeah, after they have a kid, they most likely can breastfeed. So the only difference is women can and men can't. So all of a sudden breastfeeding was protected, and that is a case that led to a lot of places being required to have breastfeeding rooms or a place a woman can go to breastfeed, whether it be at work or in a public place like the mall or something. So they have that. The latest example is gender identity and sexual orientation. Same thing, little bit different of an analysis, but basically the same outcome. Hey, that person at work was married to a woman and was doing their job just fine. Someone else at the same company is doing the same job and is married to a man. What's the difference? One's married to a woman, one's married to a man. You're not allowed to discriminate if they're at work about them being a woman or a man. Why are you allowed to discriminate against outside of work if they're married to a woman or a man? Doesn't make a difference at work. So it is all based on sex. By the way, that case, one of the 3 cases that went to the Supreme Court was from Michigan, and it was a man originally worked at a funeral parlor and then became a woman and started coming to work as a woman, alerted work saying, oh, just to let you guys know, I'm going to start coming as a woman. That's who I truly feel I am, and they fired her. And hers was one of the 3 cases that went to the Supreme Court, and they basically said the same thing for that as well. If she interviewed as a woman and you hired her, you wouldn't have been able to discriminate based on if she was a man or a woman. So we get it. It might take you by surprise. It might not be what you expected. Who knows? But the only difference is that employee was a man and now is a woman. So you can't discriminate against that. That's all based on sex. Nothing in the law at all about pregnant women or about breastfeeding or about changing your gender. Nothing in the law at all about that, but it still is protected based on common law and its interpretation of statutory law, which says you can't discriminate on someone based on sex. So disparate treatment usually depends on time, not of it happening at work, which is usually culture. It seems like there's a lot more people very openly firing people for being transgender right now because it's fairly new, at least in the media, and not a lot of people openly saying, I'm firing you because of your race. So let's talk about disparate treatment. This has to be pretty bold-faced for the person to be able to be successful. It has to be a facially discriminatory policy, facially on its face. Like the policy itself will say, a salary of a woman is $87,000, but a man gets 100. It has to be pretty out in the open, which mostly for race-based things, it's been 80 years, a little bit less since civil rights. So a lot of people aren't open about it, or at least as open as people were maybe in the 60s. But it still exists, and it's really hard to prove, and that's why companies usually win. People, I think, are a little more open about being discriminatory towards transgender people, with like the person at the funeral home in Michigan that fired her. Just literally, that was the reason. So the thing itself has to be facially discriminatory in order for someone to have something bad happen. By the way, in order to sue, there has to be an adverse employment action, and I'm putting that in quotes not because it's fake or anything like that, but because that is another magic word. It has to be an adverse employment action. That means you have to be demoted. That means you have to make less money. That means you have to be fired. That means something has to happen like that. You can't just still be working along and everything is okay and then you sue. No, you can't sue. You have to have damages. You have to have lost money. You have to have lost your livelihood in order to sue. You can't just sue people because you feel like it. Something bad has to actually happen. So if something bad happens, like I'm fired from a funeral home, and it's facially discriminatory, like, you used to be a man and now you're a woman, so I'm firing you, that would be covered under a case for disparate treatment. What would have to happen is I would have to go to the company or go to the court and prove that the company did something because of a protected reason. And then if I wanted to, if the company wanted to, it could respond and defend itself. And it would give a bona fide occupational qualification, meaning like a for real reason why we need this person to be a man at work. It's not really a requirement to be a man at a funeral parlor. There are men in funeral parlors and there are women at funeral parlors. It might be different if I was a woman working at a strip club and then became a man and went to go still work at the strip club. That might be different. And that might be a good reason and a defense that the company would have about like, this is a strip club and people come here to see women strip, not men, so that's not going to work for us. That probably would work in court. Funeral parlor, it doesn't matter if the funeral director is a man or a woman. Both can do the job. It's not a requirement for the job, so they can't fire someone because they're a different gender than they were before. So they can defend themselves, and then after the defense, the person can go back with a rebuttal and say that, that defense wasn't any good, or that defense was fake. That's what pretext is called. If the company is giving a fake reason, they can prove that it's pretext, or they can give like further evidence to say, no, that's not why. Here's all these other, jokes you used to tell in work about women, and here's all the other things, and it just turns out that, you don't like women, and so you don't want to work with one. So that's kind of how a disparate treatment case goes. That's how a lot of cases go, but just disparate treatment in general. The person suing, the person who was the employee who got fired or who lost out on the promotion or who didn't get the raise or whatever it is, they have to prove their case. That plaintiff has to prove the case, and they have to prove that the employer was discriminatory. And that's usually done through, in disparate treatment, that's usually the discriminatory policy itself is shown. Just in case anyone says it, reverse discrimination isn't a thing. Discrimination is discrimination. If someone says, I'm not hiring you because you are white, that's discrimination. That's based on my skin color. That's not reverse discrimination. Reverse discrimination is kind of a discriminatory term because that would imply that, like me, for example, as a white person, I'm the only one allowed to say something is discrimination. Otherwise, it's reversing against me. I'm the only one allowed to discriminate. anyone can discriminate against each other. So if you said it, don't feel bad. A lot of people say it without thinking about the implications of it. But discrimination is discrimination. It's a two-way street. If I got fired for being white, that is discrimination. It's nothing as reverse. So that's that. If something is a practice and it's happened all the time, the company can't use that as a reason, like, oh, that's just how it's always been. Well, okay, change it. Can't do it anymore. That's what happens when laws are passed. You have to change. That's what happens when the Supreme Court rules on something. You have to change. You have to comply with the new law. So, it being a practice makes it worse because that person who's suing probably has more proof that the company has wrongdoing as part of as part of its soul, as part of its social structure within the company. And like I said, pretext is something that's fake, like a fake reason. I said I fired this person because of one thing. They were a poor performer. The person's not performing very well, so I'm going to fire them, when it turns out you were firing them because of their race or because of their sex, because there would be other people in the company who performed worse that you didn't fire. So that would be pretext, that's a fake reason. If there's a mixed motive, it depends on what would have happened if you took one or the other away. If I'm firing someone because you're a woman and because you stole $10,000 from the company, would I have still been able to fire them if they stole $10,000 from the company? Yes. Yes, it would be expected that you would fire someone who's stealing from the company. So the fact that it's from a woman doesn't look good, but that person would still have lost their job for the most part. If it was something like, oh, you're a woman and you're a poor performer, they'll look at the performance of that person, see if it was really that bad, look at everyone else's performance, see if it was as bad as that person's, see if that person's performance was good every year, except my birthday's in May. Let's say just May. I take time off for my birthday, my performance always dips, and then I'm back up in June every single year since I've worked there. And so now I'm getting fired because of my performance in May, and also because a woman. It's like, I don't know. It might be because you're a woman, because the performance goes down every May and you've never been punished before. That's probably a pretext. It's probably not the real reason. So for disparate treatment, if someone is getting hired and doesn't get hired, they can sue under disparate treatment. The first thing they have to prove is their protected class characteristic. Like I said, it has to be something protected. What that class characteristic is: my sex, my religion, something, my color, something about me, the reason I think you didn't hire me. I have to have applied for the job, because I can't just not apply for a job and expect to get it. I have to have been qualified for the job. If I'm really I can't apply to be the CEO of General Motors once Mary Barra leaves, and then be mad when they don't hire me, because I'm probably not qualified to be CEO of General Motors. Not yet, anyway. But you have to be qualified for the job. It has to be available. Mary Barra is in the job right now. I can't go to GM and say, I want to be CEO, and they would say no, and I'm suing them because she's a woman and I'm a man, and obviously that's sex discrimination. The job has to be available for me to sue, for me to not get it, because I didn't get it. I had to be denied the opportunity. Remember, there has to be the adverse employment action, so I didn't get the job. I can't sue if I got the job. I got the job. It wasn't discriminatory. So, okay, I had to have been denied the job, and the company hired someone with contrasting class characteristics. That would be the case that the plaintiff would have to prove. If it's a woman saying, I didn't get the job because I'm a woman, she would have to say, I'm a woman, the job was available, I was qualified for the job, I applied for the job, I didn't get the job, and they hired a man instead. That would be the elements. You have to meet every single one on your case for disparate treatment. Once you prove that, the company has an opportunity to defend itself. So the company can say, yes, we hired this man. This man has a higher degree than you do. You have your bachelor's degree, he has his master's degree. This man has 10 years experience, you only have 5 years experience. So we hired him instead of you. That's a pretty decent defense. The company would probably still be okay with that. They probably would have successfully defended themselves. That person is more qualified for the job than the woman. If the company doesn't have a good defense, then we keep going, right? Either way, whether the company has a good defense or not, the person does have a chance for a rebuttal, and they can come back and say, the boss said women don't deserve degrees. The boss said, in an email between other people, that women aren't as good of workers. Or the boss said that men are inherently smarter people, so it's no wonder he had a better degree. That would be discriminatory, and that would be pretext. So let's talk about disparate treatment. The way an employee or someone who should have been an employee, they think sues for disparate treatment, is they make their prima facie case. Prima facie, on its face, they make the first blush. They make their first claim. Remember, all of these are claims, which means we have to meet every single element from here on out, right? This isn't a test, this is an actual claim. Once they make the claim, the company can defend itself. Once the company has defended itself, the person can rebut their decision. We're going to talk about Jones versus Oklahoma City Schools as our example when we do this. Ms. Jones was in a pretty high up position. She was approaching a certain age. And for a while, people kept walking around the office and be like, oh, Ms. Jones, are you going to retire soon? What do you think? She wasn't ready to retire. She didn't want to retire. She wanted to keep working. And so she always kind of had said that she's not going to retire. When she did hit that age, people started asking again, like, oh, wow, you're retirement eligible. You gonna do that? You're going to retire? And she said no, she wasn't going to retire. She liked her job. She wanted to keep working. She was in the administration at Oklahoma City Schools. She was going to keep going. Okay, well, it really stinks, but the district has to go through some stuff, so there's just not enough room for her anymore. Like, her job, it's just is being eliminated. It's not going to exist anymore. And that really stinks. We're not firing you, though. We're making you a principal of a school. Still very prestigious. Not as prestigious as working in the office, but still, we're not just throwing you out on the street. And so she became the principal of a school. That came with a $17,000 pay cut. That came with a lot of benefit losses, vacation day losses, all of those sorts of things. She was working as a principal at a school. And then the district came out with a new job. All of a sudden, there was a need to have someone else to have this work get done. Okay, so they opened up a new job, and she wanted that job, and she didn't get that job. And instead, someone, I think 13 years younger than her, got it. So she sued. In the prima facie case, in the thing she has to prove originally, there's 6 things. The first thing she has to prove is her protected class characteristic. She was saying it was her age, that she was demoted because it was her age. There was an employment opportunity available. She applied for it. She was qualified for it. She was denied. Those are almost the rest of them. There was a job available. They created a new position. It was open. It was open. They were hiring for it. They had put out a thing for it. Someone eventually was hired, so obviously they were hiring for it. She was qualified. It was all of the same job qualifications of her old job. I think there was one, and it was less. So this job was less qualified than her old job. So she still had all of the qualifications because she had done that for years with good reviews, by the way. So she was qualified for it, and she didn't get it. And the last element is that someone would contrasting protected class characteristics. Got it. She was suing based on age, so someone younger than her got it. So that's, according to her, discriminatory. On a side note, you can't discriminate against people older than you. It's legally impossible to, preferring someone older instead of younger is not discrimination. If a 60-year-old and a 47-year-old applied for a job and they were like, we're going to take the 60-year-old because they're older, that's fine. There's no age discrimination that way. It only counts if they're going younger. So, she meets all the requirements. It was age, the job was available, she was qualified for the job, she applied for the job, she was denied the job, and someone younger than her got the job. Contrasting protected class characteristic. Okay, the employer gets to rebut. No, this is not the same job as before. This is a very different job, and so she just wasn't as qualified as the person that got the job. That's what the school district said. If the person is more qualified, that's a pretty good defense, right? If the person was more qualified and they're going to be more productive, then they'll get the job. She rebutted. That's the third thing. You make the claim, the company can respond, now the person can rebut. She rebutted saying, no, she's not better qualified. I have the same education she does. I have way more years of experience. This used to be my old job, and I did it well with good reviews. So I am better qualified for this job than her. Okay, well, if she's not as qualified for the job, the person that got it, what's the difference between her and Ms. Jones? It was age. So Jones won that lawsuit. She claimed age, and it looked like age. She proved all the elements, and the school district's response was not good. It was pretext. It was fake. Oh, she's better suited for this job. No, she's not. This person had the job. She's better qualified for the job. She's done it before, and you said she was good before. So, and the comments made before aren't 100% like, oh my God, for sure the school did it, because people can make a comment, you can't control it, right? Employees make comments. But the years of comments, plus the fact that it was her birthday, and she hit retirement age, and they asked her about it, and when she said no, it was like a week later, she was demoted, was really suspicious. So eventually, the court found that she was discriminated against because of her age. So she won that claim, and that is how a disparate treatment claim works. It was pretty obvious to her that it was her age. It wasn't like, there wasn't like a policy like, oh, demote anyone who turns 62 or whatever she was. They didn't have that kind of policy, but people were pretty open about like, hey, you're getting up there, huh? And she didn't like that, so she was able to get her job back. The other kind of case is an adverse impact claim. Once again, it's a claim, it's not a test. All of them are going to be claims. You're going to meet all of them. This is for when it's not as open. This is not for, when the employer says, oh, you used to be a man and you're a woman, you're fired. This isn't when the employer says, oh, you're retirement age, are you going to retire? No? Okay, demoted. This is when it's a lot harder to prove, and it can't really happen to one person. One person will bring the suit, but there almost has to be like a systematic, this is happening to everyone. So the prima facie case, the first case someone will bring up, is there is a neutral requirement that disproportionately affects a protected class. Whatever protected class that is, there's a neutral requirement that disproportionately affects that protected class. The second is that it's too much to be a coincidence. If there's one woman that doesn't pass a strength test when a man does, okay, that's one person. If there's one African American that doesn't get to be in the police academy, but white people still were, that's one person. If a third of women fail a test, but all men do, or compared to the men, that's pretty big. And that might make people think like, what What is in that test that is making women fail? What is making, whatever that protected class is, race, something, religion, what's making them fail? Are they asking questions specifically that Catholics would know that Muslims won't, or vice versa? And does that have anything to do with the job? By the way, I would expect to be asked questions about Catholicism if I was trying to get a job with the Catholic Church. But if I'm trying to get a job at Ford Motor Company, that's not a religion. So they shouldn't be asking questions that a Catholic or a Christian would know that a Muslim wouldn't, because that would be discriminatory toward race. And this would be the kind of claim that would bring the adverse impact. A neutral requirement, everyone has to take this test. Everyone has to take this test. It's fine, to get hired. You just have to get a passing grade, but it disproportionately affects a group of people. We aren't going to use an example with adverse impact because a lot of the cases we will see through the course are adverse impact, and we'll kind of revisit it as we go through. But if the plaintiff proves it, yes, there was a policy that disproportionately affected people, and it's too big to be a coincidence, then the company has a chance to defend its practice. Yes, there is a strength test, and so men in general are stronger than women, but guess what? It's a safety issue, and if you want to be a UPS driver, you have to lift at least 70 pounds, and so if more men pass that, that's fine, but if not, we allow up to 70 pounds for our packages. So that's we don't want our employees getting hurt. That might be a good defense. If it was 30 pounds, but I make them lift 70 just to really make sure, that might be going too far. And that is, what the person would rebut. They would say, that's a fake standard. There's a better way of doing this, and the company isn't adopting that way of doing it. So once again, this is shorter, but it happens a lot more often. Prima facie case. There's a neutral requirement that disproportionately affects a protected group of people, and that effect is too big to be a coincidence. The company can defend by saying it is job-related and consistent with business necessity. This is what we need to operate. And then the person can rebut by saying, no, there's this other way of doing it that works just as well, and you won't do it. And that's how an adverse impact claim is made. There are some other things to talk about while we're here. Different kinds of evidence that can be brought during cases. So when we talk about the evidence that I've kind of been using is direct evidence. Evidence that shows there's a smoking gun. You can see what happened, and it's pretty clear to, let's say, a jury, that they'll be able to see if something's put in front of them. Oh, yeah, no, this policy is discriminatory, or oh, that boss said discriminatory things. So there it is, a lot of direct evidence. That is used more in the disparate treatment because that's easier to prove and to make your case. There's also circumstantial evidence, like we said, if there's a height requirement or a weight lifting requirement or something like that, it might seem like, oh, that's maybe okay for the job, but it's like circumstantial. I would understand if a UPS driver had to have a weight lifting requirement because they lift boxes all the time. If someone who worked at the grocery store stocking shelves, I suppose they're picking things up out of a box and putting it on the shelf, but do you need a weightlifting requirement for the cans of beans people put on the shelf, especially if they're like a front-end clerk? Probably not. So that might be more circumstantial, that a company just is, no, I want everyone to be able to be safe and lift stuff if we need them to. Seems sometimes like they're a cashier. They're not going to be lifting 70 pounds at the grocery store. So that would be more circumstantial evidence, and you would have to show that a class of people fail this all the time. There's also comparative evidence, and that is best shown in the Diaz versus Kraft Foods case that's on Moodle. And in that case, the manager didn't like a specific race of people. and he made them do terrible work compared to all the other work done at the plant. I mean, people are like processing food, but these people were out cleaning the sewers. He had them do, all of that sort of stuff. And through like a layoff and rehire thing, he didn't give those people their jobs back. They gave other people their jobs back. These people were Latino. He didn't give the Latinos their jobs back, but he gave other people their jobs back. And the Latinos claimed the manager was racist and not treating them as well. The manager's defense was, no, look, there's black people, and I treat African Americans just fine. So I'm not racist. I just don't like them. You can't, that's not, it doesn't matter as far as comparative evidence. It doesn't matter that you treat another minority better than me. It's still a race-based discrimination, and you can't do that. And so comparing a Latino versus a white person is fine because you're saying you were discriminated against because of your national origin or your race. But the boss can't come back and say, well, yes, but I treated this other person, this other race better than you. Because that in itself proves that I didn't treat you as well as this other race. It's kind of a self-defeating defense. So they can use comparative evidence. That's what happened in Diaz versus Kraft Foods. The Latinos were not treated as well as the African Americans, and by the way, the African Americans weren't treated as well as the white people. But that manager's defense was kind of self-defeating in itself. There's also the cat's paw theory. Cat's paw comes from an old comic that was allegedly very famous 100 years ago, where the mice were standing in the flame were shining on them, and then the shadow on the wall made them bigger, which made the cat get stuff out of the fire for the rats, and it was like the rats were controlling the cat's paw, which is why they call it the cat's paw theory. Anyway, if the manager, if the HR department, let's say, doesn't know something started with racist, it's still racist. And in that case, something happened where the floor manager was pretty racist and said openly jokes about different races and treated two different people very differently. Two people were in a fight, like roughhousing in the workplace, which happened all the time. This was a warehouse, and it happened all the time with a lot of people. But the first time an African American was roughhousing with a white person, the white person did not get in trouble. The African American did. And if you go through the case directly at that level, the African American would have won very easily. But the way the company was set up, the manager lied, by the way, but still talked to like the director, who talked to the HR department, and the HR department thought it had all the information it needed and went down with disciplinary letters to the African American worker. Well, what happened was HR didn't know, right? It went through multiple things and multiple levels, and the direct manager lied to the director about it. And so that was the company's defense. Look, HR wrote the letter, and HR wasn't racist. I suppose HR could have looked and seen what his race was, but HR didn't know. All HR knew was that this guy was in a fight and needed to be disciplined. That's not racist. We don't want people fighting at work. Okay, well, cat's paw. Just because HR didn't know didn't mean the basis of it with his floor manager didn't have racist motivations. And so even though the HR person was not racist, the original racism went all the way through the system and followed it through. So that company was still held liable for that guy. And finally, we come to retaliation. You can't retaliate against someone for participating in something, exercising their rights, or for opposing discrimination. Those are kind of the two things that people are most often retaliated for. But basically, if you fire someone, among the other reasons, like we talked about, it can't be for retaliation. So, the elements of retaliation that someone has to claim: that person was engaged in protected activity or opposed discrimination, and they suffered a materially adverse employment action. They were fired. Their pay was taken away. Just something like they were disciplined of some sort. And there was a causal link. So the reason they were fired was because they were in that protected activity. Whether they went to a march on Washington, which is your right to do, whether they did anything like that, whether they were in the company and saw discrimination and reported it, that happens a lot more often, that you can't fire someone for that. So if that person was fired because they did that thing, whether it was report or go march, that's the prima facie case for retaliation. Of course, the company can come back, the employer can come back with a legal, lawful, non-discriminatory reason. Yeah, that's fine that they went and marched on Washington, but they also stole $10,000. Here we're talking about the mixed motives. You would have been fired anyway for stealing $10,000. So that wasn't retaliation. They're still allowed to be fired because they stole the money. If the company comes back with something else, like not as damning, like just another reason that they said was fired, oh no, it just seemed really sloppy lately, like, I don't know, shirt's not tucked in all the time, I don't know, their heart's not been in it lately. That person can come back and say, no, here's my rebuttal, and give more evidence, or say, yeah, the reason I'm not in it is because I know you're discriminating against people all the time, and I don't want to work for someone like that. I mean, just all rebuttal, that's fine, but that's what they got to prove. They were fired, let's say, because they were taking part in a protected activity or opposing discrimination. The company has a chance to defend itself, and then the person can come up with a rebuttal after that. There is third-party retaliation, by the way. You don't have to fire that person. If you say to that person, don't do that thing, or I'm going to fire your husband, and all of a sudden the spouse is being held hostage because they didn't want that person to do that, you can't get around that. If the boss gives like an ultimatum that something bad is going to happen to someone, and even if it's not you, that's still retaliation. So no secondary retaliation is allowed either. So you can take part in your protected activity, or you can oppose discrimination, and that's fine. So that's it. Long video. Those are the ways that people can sue for discrimination. If they aren't hired, they can either be disparate treatment or an adverse impact, and you can't fire them for doing a protected activity or opposing discrimination. And it's going to be up to you as the HR department to watch out for it, because, once again, cat's paw, just because you might not be discriminatory doesn't mean if the floor manager is, or if you heard something about someone, it can follow you all the way through. So it'll be your job to watch out for it and make sure the company doesn't make those mistakes that are pretty easy to avoid. See you next video.